Hello everybody, I'm Gwen Campbell-Mindes. Welcome to Gwen's Bookish Ramblings. Today's book is what it is because it was a book I didn't have to read every word of in order to talk about it, because of various time limitation things. Anyways, you're not interested. It was a dark and stormy night. As you can read from the cover here, the funniest opening sentences from the worst novels never written. The Bulwer-Lytton contest does what it says on the tin. And it's a very, very entertaining thing to read. It's a great book for carrying in a bag with you for when you're stuck in line a little longer than you had planned. It's not a book that you sit down and read, or at least it's not supposed to be. I'll admit to having just sat down and read through it. It's more a book that you have around, and when you're bored or when you're doing something or waiting for something, you flip it open, you read a few paragraphs here or there, and then you close it and move on and do other things. Now the title, It Was a Dark and Stormy Night, does, of course, derive from a particular book by one Edward Bulwer-Lytton. And Edward George Earl Bulwer-Lytton, 1803 to 1873. I now proceed to quote from the book. A prolific Victorian novelist and general all-around man of letters, as a writer of novels, he was second in popularity only to Charles Dickens. In fact, a keen judge of public taste or tastelessness, he reputedly convinced Dickens to alter the ending of Great Expectations, arranging for its hero Pip to get married and live happily ever after. In Victorian England, this was known as good box office. The thing about this particular contest, there are many worst opening sentences from terrible novels that were never written. The problem with this is more that funny opening sentences from worst novels never written is that far too many of these are good enough sentences that you find yourself thinking, I want to read that novel. Where is the novel that begins with this sentence? Because it sounds like it could be interesting. Indeed, when you look at the It Was a Dark and Stormy Night opening sentence, which has entered into long-term infamy, the full sentence, it was a dark and stormy night, the rain fell in torrents, except at occasional intervals when it was checked by a violent gust of wind which swept up the streets, for it is in London that our scene lies, rattling along the housetops and fiercely agitating the scanty flame of the lamps that struggled against the darkness. It's wordy, and it's long, and it's melodramatic, but it's not really awful. I mean, it's not great, but I think we've all read worse. And the thing is that a great many of these sentences are not as awful as one might expect, and as I said, some of them you want to know where that book is that it was written for. In this case, one example is in fact the 1983 winner, who was Gail Kane of San Francisco, California. And her opening sentence, the camel died quite suddenly on the second day, and Selina fretted sulkily and buffing her already impeccable nails, not for the first time since the journey began, pondered snidely if this would dissolve into a vignette of minor inconveniences like all the other holidays spent with Basil. That's not actually a bad opening sentence, because it pulls you in. It leaves you wondering about all of those other holidays spent with Basil. It leaves you wondering about why there was a camel, why the camel died on the second day. It leaves you wondering about what these holidays are and who is Basil to Selina, or Selina to Basil. And so they're very entertaining. They're frequently very funny. But the worst novels never written may not be quite the correct descriptor. I mean, part of the problem is that a terrible, funniest opening sentence from a worst novel never written is that you should be looking at the potential novel to derive from that sentence and say, oh yes, this would be a terrible novel. If you look at the potential novel that might derive from that sentence and say, I think that could be good, where is that? Then it really shouldn't win. But they win anyhow. So it's a bit of a misnomer, and I suspect a bit of a misunderstanding on the part of whoever makes the and whoever makes the decisions on this. Now, It Was a Dark and Stormy Night is a collection from the very first Bulwer-Lytton contest. There are, in fact, future collections, which I may or may not choose to do for this, mainly because, of course, each of these is just a collection of opening sentences. And so once you've read one, you have, metaphorically speaking, read them all. I absolutely would recommend this to people who have the kind of sense of humor that finds these sort of things funny. But it is certainly not, it's not necessarily a book that, that I can read every single one in the series and talk about them. It's divided into subject matter chapters, each of which is sort of covering a particular selection of kinds of opening sentences. There's one devoted to vile puns and heaving alabaster bosoms, hairy proteins and artificial sweetener. Mandy, the duck, reads another one. In A Dark and Stormy Night, the final chapter is one that is filled with opening sentences that are clearly derivative of the It Was a Dark and Stormy Night original. One of my favorites is in there, which was, It was a stark and dormy night the co-ed streakers ran from hall to hall, for it is on a state university campus that our scene lies, except at occasional intervals when they were checked by security officers who were rattled and fiercely agitated by the inflaming sight of the rain-streaked, flashing white, yellow, and black bodies, the last named seen only in the scant, intermittent alabaster illumination by the now and then bursts of lightning. So, this isn't a book that lends itself well to lengthy discussions of plot or other such things. It's a book where, in effect, what I need to wind up doing with this is just reading you excerpts and hoping that somebody takes it on. So I will proceed to do that for a few more rounds. Pamela's heart beat fast and her hands trembled a lot as she listened to the intermittent knocking on the front door of her shanty located near the railroad tracks beside a hobo jungle, and she thought, that's a bum rap if I ever heard one. The railroad agent told the Navajo the coming of the Iron Horse will bring great prosperity to the red man, but the Indians had reservations. Take your hand off my breast, she tittered. In the dark room where Bulwer-Lytton sat, stroking his head, the cock never crowed, nor the clock never ticked, but clucked, Dickens, Dickens, Dickens. As the overcrowded steamship battled its way westward, ever westward through frenzied seas toward America, the emigrant passengers, who had seen the last of Mother Ireland 2 days back when County Cork belied its name and sank in the ocean, huddled miserably below deck, each racked with painful memories of the past, anxious about the future and seasickness, but none more so than 21-year-old Bridie O'Reilly, now 2 months pregnant after a chance meeting with a black evangelist in Sligo, and more than a little apprehensive at the thought of joining Sean, her betrothed, who had staked out a beat for himself as a New York policeman this last 12th night. It goes on and on and on like that. So, if you think that you would enjoy reading a collection of opening sentences for the purpose of a bad writing contest that pitted entrants against the worst literary minds in bookdom, the goal of each entrant being to compose the worst possible opening sentence for an imaginary novel. In other words, the contest asked for the worst words and intentionally bad prose. If you think you would enjoy this, if you think that you would enjoy any collection of literary efforts involving, as she fell face down in the black muck of the mud wrestling pit, her sweaty 300-pound opponent muttering soft curses in Latin on top of her, Sister Marie thought, "There is no doubt about it, the Pope has betrayed me." Or, "Serenity lay over the grounds like a soft caress, the bells for matins chimed as they had for centuries before, as 75 black-robed nuns rose from their cots and licked their lips in anticipation of Sister Immaculata's cinnamon wheat henna, which steamed comfortingly in the refectory." If you think that this is up your alley, you should probably track down a copy of this book, stick it in a bag, and have it ready for the next time you're stuck in waiting in the doctor's office, at the DMV. Choose a place where you normally get stuck in line. It's right there, and it'll probably also make a good book for things like pickup lines. Not that you'd use them as pickup lines, but, reading off sentences, and if the person you're talking to that you're interested in finds it as amusing as you do, well, there you go. So I hope that somebody has enjoyed this particular set of recommendations. And I will see you all next week.